Today we're going to talk about radical functions, section 8.7. Who remembers what a radical is?
Oh, I remember.
Square root. Radical is a root.
Ish.
Okay? So, for example, a radical is a root. It's also a cube root, fourth root, fifth root. Those are all radicals. Today, forever, we're going to focus on square roots. We're going to talk about functions. So, radical function, section 8.7. Square root. The square root function. F of x equals the square root of x is a radical function. Now we're going to talk about this square root right here. Okay, square root of x. What is the smallest value you can have inside a square root and get a real number? Okay, so for example, my question to you is basically, what is the smallest value you can put for x there? Okay, so I have the square root here. What is the smallest number I can put inside there and get a real number back out? Okay, a lot of people start with 4. Square root of 4 is 2. That's a real number, right? There's a number less than 4 I can put in there.
1.
A lot of people go to 1 then next. Square root of 1. Square root of 1 is 1, right? We're all good at that. There's actually a number less than 1. 0. 0 is the smallest number you can put inside a radical. Why? Because what's the square root of 0? 0, okay? If I put a negative underneath the radical, what do I get? I get the letter I, get the imaginary solution. All right?
Josh?
So what we're doing here is we're looking at what are the lowest values. Well, we're going to focus on some domain and range today. Domain is my what value, Gabe? Talked about it earlier in the warm-up. X. And my range is my? Y. Domain is X, range is Y. So domain is my X value. It's going to be like, what's the smallest value I can put in there? Well, what do we talk about? The smallest value here would be 0. Because you can't have anything less than 0. You get imaginary solutions. So my domain is X is greater than or equal to 0. Now, range. X is my domain, my input. My Y value is my range or my output. If I plug 0 in here, what do I get out? 0. So my range on this problem is Y is greater than or equal to 0. So that gives me my domain and range. And then I can graph the function. Okay. Now again, notice it's a square root function. So notice there's not an arrow going down. It is just a one-way arrow going just that way. Okay, because I can't have anything less than 0, so it's not going to keep going down that way. So recognize that. Now, those are kind of your basic problems. We're going to look at problems like this today. Well, I have f of x equals the square root of x plus 3. So now as you look at it, remember, the lowest value I can get inside a radical is the number 0. So what's my smallest x value I can plug in here? Negative 3 is the smallest value. So that means my domain is negative 3. Does everybody see why it's negative 3? Now some people are like, but you can't have a negative inside a radical. But my number's not going to be negative. It's just x that I'm plugging in that's negative. Does that make sense for everybody? When I plug it in and work it out, negative 3 plus 3 is 0. I don't get a negative radical. Okay, it comes out to be 0. When I plug negative 3 in, I get 0 back out. That gets me my domain and range. Now, focus here. We did negative 3. Negative 3, we got 0. Square root of 0 got me negative 3, 0. Next, I went to negative 2. Plug negative 2 in. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. Square root of 1 is negative 2, 1. And then all of a sudden, they jumped to the number 1. A lot of times, we go in order. We go negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1. You go in order, right? But here, all of a sudden, they went from negative 3, negative 2 to all of a sudden the number 1. Why did they go to the number 1? Why is it easier, Trevor? Yeah, look at these. What are all these numbers right here? I think Peyton's saying over there. They're all perfect squares. I want to pick numbers that are easy to compute. Could I have picked the number negative 1? Yes. Okay, I could have picked negative 1, plugged it in. I already got 2, the square root of 2, but then you're like, psh, I don't know the square root of 2 off the top of my head. Okay, it's like 1.43. It's okay. But the problem is we want numbers that are easy to compute. If we're picking the values, we're going to pick numbers that are easy to compute. So I'm going to pick numbers that get me to perfect squares. So yeah, you're going to jump some values here. I'm going to pick the number 1 because then I get to 4. I'm going to pick the number 6. Why? Because 6 plus 3 is 9. I know what the square root of 9 is. So now I get my ordered pairs and I graph my function. So as we're going through here today, you're going to be picking some different values. All right? Pick values that are going to get you to perfect squares. It'll make everything a lot easier. So let's look at number 1. It says graph the function, identify its domain and range. What's my domain again? Watkins, give me the domain. What's my range, K? Y, good job. So domain, what is the smallest x value I can plug in here? What is the smallest x value I'm going to be able to plug in here? Serena, what are you thinking?
2.
So x is greater than or equal to 2. Nice job, Serena. If I plug 2 in, what do I get back out? What's my range going to be? Tyler, if I plug 2 in, what do I get back out? 0. So my range is y is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. Now I'm going to pick some values. Notice I picked 2. So I'm going to pick 2, plug it in. I get the square root of 2 minus 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Square root of 0 is 0. I get the coordinate 2, 0. Does everybody see how I did that? Next, I'm going to pick the number 3. They kind of have that for us there, so I'm going to plug 3 in. I get the square root of 3 minus 2. 3 minus 2 is 1. Square root of 1 is... Square root of 1, anybody? 1. So I get 3, 1. All right. Now, after the number 3, now it starts jumping around a bit. What's my next value I want to pick? It's not going to be 4. It's going to be what? 6. Does everybody see why I picked the number 6? Because when I plug it in here, I'm going to get the absolute, or the square root of 6 minus 2. What's 6 minus 2? Square root of 4. Square root of 4 is? 2. I get the coordinate 6, 2. And then I have another number after 6. What's another number I need to pick here? 11. Because the square root of 11 minus 2. 11 minus 2 is 9. Square root of 9 is 3. I get the value 11, 3. Okay. And then I graph my function there. Now, when you're doing this, I always suggest doing at least 4 points. If you want to do more than 4, by all means, do it for it. 2 or 3 is not near enough. Okay, do at least 4 so you can see it's a curve. Okay, so you want to see how that curves. All right. Take a couple seconds here. Let's try number 2 on our own. It says graph each function and identify its domain and range. So start off finding the domain and range, and then you're going to make a table of values here. So you need x, and then you plug that into absolute value of x minus 4, and that's what gets me my y value. All right, so take a couple seconds. Try this one on your own. So number 2 here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the domain. Sam, give me the domain here.
X is greater than or equal to 4.
X is greater than or equal to 4. Suitor, what's the range here?
The range would be 0. X is greater than y. Y.
Range is y, so y is greater than or equal to 0. So the first value I'm going to pick here, Nathan, is 4. I'm going to pick my domain. Plug it in. Square root of 4 minus 4 is 0. I get the coordinate 4, 0. Awesome. Next coordinate I'm going to pick now is what, Camden? 5. Because the square root of 5 minus 4 is 1. I get 1. So I get the coordinate 5, 1. After 5 now, what's the next logical point to pick? 8. I don't want to pick 6. Okay. Yeah, 6 is going to get you the square root of 2. We don't know what the square root of 2 is. That's tough. 8 gets me the square root of 4. Easier. So I get the square root of 8 minus 4. Square root of 4 is 2. I plot the coordinate 8, 2. And after 8, what's the next logical coordinate? 13. Square root of 13 minus 4 is 9. Square root of 9 is?
3.
I get 13, 9. Something like over here. And there's your curve. Again, one-way direction.
Hooks.
Okay. Next one here. Take a couple seconds, try this one on your own. Now, a couple people earlier, they were like, oh, what do you do with this 4? Okay, treat it order of operations here. Do your radical first, and at the very end, you're going to multiply by 4. Okay? So treat it as order of operation, just like you would. Take a couple seconds, try this one on your own. All right, let's walk through this one here. So first off, I need to find the domain. Kenna, what's my domain? My what values?
X.
And my range is what, Kenna?
X is greater than or equal to negative 8.
So my domain is x is greater than or equal to negative 8. My range, Kenna, is my what values?
Y.
Y, what's my y? What's my range here?
Y is greater than or equal to 0.
Y is greater than or equal to 0. So I need to now make a table. So I have x, I have 4 square root of x plus 8, and I have y. So what x value am I going to start with here, Kenna?
-8.
I'm going to start with -8. So I'm going to start with my domain, my first value. I plug -8 in here. So that's 4 square root of -8 plus 8. Well, what's -8 plus 8? Square root of 0 is? 0 times 4 is? I get -8, 0. Boom. There's my first coordinate.
Don't look at me.
Now, after -8, what is the next best number to pick? -7. Why -7? Because watch, we do 4 square root of -7 plus 8. -7 plus 8 is 1. Square root of 1 is? 1 times 4 is?
4.
I get -7, 4. After -7, my next best number would be -4. So I have 4 square root of -4 plus 8. Well, what's -4 plus 8?
4.
Square root of 4 is? 2 times 4 is? 8. I get -4, 8. After -4, the next best value is? 1. After plug 1 in, I get 4 square root of 1 plus 8. 1 plus 8 is 9. Square root of 9 is? 3 times 4 is? I get 112.
Wait, so does it matter? Like, because I started at 1.
You start at 1, that's fine. You'd have more bigger numbers up here then if you went from there. Does that make sense? You're still getting a pretty good idea. All right. Now, last problem. You'll have a couple like this as well. So instead of a problem like this, you're now going to have, g of x equals the square root of x minus 2 plus 3. Now, pay attention here. If I get a problem like this, first off, what's the smallest x value I can plug in there? 2. So I would say x has to be greater than or equal to 2. Now, if I take 2 and I plug it in, I would get 2 minus 2 is 0. Square root of 0 is? Plus 3. My range is now y is greater than or equal to 3. Okay? So just like the problem we just did, you had to multiply by 4 at the end. On a problem like this, you have to add 3 at the end. Okay? Otherwise, it's the same idea. Here's your assignment.